So, I made a D&D 5e adventure based in the world of fairy tales and nursery rhymes. And while I encouraged my players to build fairy tale characters of their own, I also made pre-generated characters for each class. Let's start off with the Barbarian. For the Barbarian, we had Little Miss Muffet, and that's because she does curls and eats whey. And I know the connection is weak, but they get better, I swear. For this, because she's little, I made her a gnome of the Tinker variety and should have joined the adventure after being scared off her tuffet by an itsy bitsy spider. But other barbarian options were maybe Beast from Beauty and the Beast, an ogre, so maybe a half orc based on little Billy Goat Gruff, or maybe a Goliath as a half giant based on maybe the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk. For the next class, we have the Bard. And for this Bard, I had to go with the Pied Piper of Hamelin. I mean, he got rid of the town's rat as promised by playing his pipe, and then the town refused to pay him, so he played a tune to take their children away instead. Very Bard behavior. I also made him a tiefling because of the implications in some story that he may have been the devil in disguise, and gave him spells like Suggestion and a Pipe of the Sewers, which is an item in D&D based on the legend of the Pied Piper. Other options for the Bard were most princesses, since there's a lot of stories about them singing, but especially maybe the Little Mermaid, who is a siren. For the next class, the Cleric. For this Cleric, I went Chicken Little as an Aarakocra or bird folk of the Tempest domain. So Chicken Little is a Tempest domain cleric who worships some sky deity. And this also works because in D&D 5e lore, the Aarakocra are from the elemental plane of air. So if the sky was ever falling, it would make sense that they would be the first to know. Chicken Little would have started the journey after her friends Ducky Lucky, Turkey Lurkey, and Goosey Lucy were betrayed and killed by Foxy Loxy. And Chicken Little would still retain her mission to tell the king of the falling sky. For our next class, the Druid. I started off not knowing what to do with the Druid because there were options like Old MacDonald and maybe the boy from the Giving Tree. But then I sort of accidentally stumbled on something that I found hilarious. There once was an old woman that swallowed a fly. Many times reading this story, I wondered why this old lady would eat so many random animals. Then it came to me. Make her a lizard folk, and then it all made sense from there. And so she swallows spiders, flies, birds, cats, and horses. It all sounds like something a Circle of the Moon Druid lizard folk would be capable of doing as they shape shift and then act on the natural instinct of a lizard person, especially a lizard person in the form of whatever animal. So she would have joined the party after she died, quote unquote, eating the horse in her lore. But luckily, if druids die in wild shape, they just revert to their normal selves. So she can carry on just eating flesh as a regular lizard person. The next class, the Fighter. For this one, I went simple since the Fighter class is so straightforward. One of the 7 dwarfs from the Snow White story, armed with magical mining gear. I also gave him the Mage Slayer feat because he and his brethren were known to thwart the Evil Queen's attempt to kill Snow White multiple times in the original lore. So they would have joined the party after Snow White went off with the prince. Maybe he's leaving the dwarven bachelor pad to go on his own adventure. For the Monk class, I was a bit lost for the Monk class. I considered using the Ugly Duckling since the story was about finding like inner beauty, and since monks use a lot of their own inner strength, I decided instead on the Frog Prince because it was one of the first fairy tales the Grimm's brother introduced in their books, and this was one of the last classes that I had to fill. But I was pretty pleased with the results because it's a pretty standard ground build with a noble background using the monk class, but it's very interesting to see what a creature like a ground with a poison touch can do as a monk as they punch and induce poison and whatever stuns and stunning strikes a monk can do. So I'm thinking Frog Prince would have joined the campaign after getting True Love's Kiss and being changed back from a frog to a prince. But maybe at some point the true love turned sour and wore off, and the effects went with it. For the Paladin, I went with the Knight in Shining Armor. Originally, I was thinking maybe the Knight in Shining Armor would have been a fighter, but I figured the fact that the armor literally shines, it would be more Paladin adjacent. I also made the Knight a Dragonborn because the Knight in Shining Armor is mostly associated with dragons and releasing princesses from their clutches. Not much to say about the Knight except maybe they're looking to be the protagonist of their story for once. Ranger. For the Ranger, I could have gone with many options. I decided on the Woodsman from Little Red Riding Hood, just a human ranger. There were other options. I could have even used Little Red Riding Hood herself, or give players a choice between Hansel and Gretel, since they explored the woods. This one is pretty open. The Ranger class was really straightforward, really. For the Rogue, I know who we're all thinking of for the Rogue. We're all thinking Puss in Boots as a Tabaxi rogue, but DreamWorks already did that so well that I wanted to explore the second best option, Goldilocks. I mean, come on. She broke into a house and she has locks in her name. I imagined her as a halfling thief subclass rogue, which would have joined the campaign after jumping from the bear's window. That's how it went in the original books, and thieves in D&D 5e have some window climbing ability and dropping out of high places ability, I think. So her being halfling is actually funny because in the actual lore, in the original story, she was an old woman, but later tales described her as a young girl. So a halfling being mistaken for a child seemed appropriate. Sorcerer. The Sorcerer was hard for me because in most fairy tales, the protagonists, funny enough, don't start with innate magical powers many times. And the ones who do are usually powerful, like genies or fairies, etc., and serve more as patrons than as a playable character. There is one tale that fits too perfectly though, and this is The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's a relatively lesser known fairy tale about a young magician who copied his master's spells to do chores and almost ended up flooding their building. Either way, there was a Mickey Mouse adaptation of it in 1940, as well as a movie of the same name in 2010, although the latter strays from the plot a bit. But it's popular enough to be recognizable, I think. So I went with a half-elf apprentice with a quicken spell trait and twin spell, since they were both impatient and made multiple brooms by chopping it up. For the Sorcerer, there has been other submissions. I've had a player who went as the Mad Hatter in a recording campaign. Warlock. For the Warlock, it was easy enough. Cinderella. Just a human with a fae patron in the form of her fairy godmother. And I added Mask of Many Faces to allow her to disguise herself, for the ball. I'd say she'd have joined this adventure on the off time between the ball and the prince looking for her. Finally, our wizard. For the wizard, I went with the infamous Rumpelstiltskin. I made him an elf with a charlatan background and the actor feat, so a charlatan background allows him to have a secret identity. I also made him a transmutation wizard since he can turn straw into gold. Yeah, and that wraps up my list of prepared characters for the Fairy Tale DnD campaign, which I call Happily Everglades, and which we did a episode or an adventure of on the Tabletop Jamaica channel. Honorable mention to Geppetto, who would have been our artificer if I found enough information online to make an artificer sheet. But otherwise, yeah, who would you play in this world? Peace.